My name is Ginny Tribe, and I'm a facilitator, and what that means is that I do process work with organizations. I'm a real old woman. I'm almost as old as some of the other people in the audience, but, you know, what can we say? When I think about why you're here, I think the city would appreciate the fact that any citizen would be willing to give 2 or 3 hours of its time, of his or her time, to come and give some input in a process that has to do with where the city of Missoula is going in the next 3 years. And so what we tried to do as this new three-year iteration of the strategic planning process for the city is design a process that would, number one, be inclusive as possible, meaning that there would be opportunities for people to be able to say some things, but it not be so community bound that it never gets done. And so we've designed 3 opportunities within a rather short time frame of about 12 to 16 weeks that the city's going to try to get this done. 3 opportunities at the front end, and then some opportunities on the back end that on the front end you'll be able to have sort of early input on what the city ought to be thinking about and developing its plan, and then on the other end an opportunity to be able to really kind of give some final input on the draft before it goes to the council. So thanks for coming tonight. We really appreciate it, and I'm going to walk you through the agenda if that's okay, right? We have some objectives we'd like to try to meet tonight. 3 of them. We're going to try to revisit the city's operating environment, and by that we mean that we would like to have the people in this room be somewhat familiar with the trends and influences and issues that are facing the city, that the city really has to think about economically, demographically, socially, politically, if you will, that are going to help or hinder the city's ability to be successful or take advantage of its opportunities in the next 3 years. And the mayor and some staff are here, and they're going to take a very short period of time to do that, about 20 minutes, and that will leave the bulk of the time for our work. And then we want to, with you, based on some questions that we've designed, we want to explore the challenges from your perspective of the challenges that are facing the city within that operating environment. And then we want to affirm with you the 3 categories that the city has kind of used, if you'll think of them as drawers, the 3 drawers that the city opens and closes in terms of when it does its business, internally and externally. We'd like to see if we can affirm those goal categories with you. We're going to try to be out of here. Someone said to me already tonight that they would be really happy if we were out of here by 8:30, and I'm driving to Butte when this meeting's over, so I'd be happy if we were out here at least by 9, and we're scheduled for 9:30, so we'll sort of see what we do. We want to get the job done, and we'll take as much time as possible or as we can, but we're going to try to be out of here a little bit earlier. I think people's brains sort of turn off somewhere around 9 o'clock, so does this sound okay? And I know there are a few people that have to leave it before 9 o'clock. We have treats up here. There's juice, pop and water and some fruit and brownies, and stand up and help yourself whenever you want. We'll probably maybe take 1 short break during the evening, but mostly we're going to use the time to get the job done. And having said all of that, at the end, then I'm going to ask Linda Haig, the communications officer for the city, to just briefly talk a little bit about where the process goes after tonight. So that'd be okay. So sound okay? Are you in? All right. So could we start maybe at the back of the room, and would you just say who you are and if you are representing anybody other than yourself, and if you just, you know, you don't have to say self if you don't want to, but so do you want to start? Let's just go row by row. You know, we need to do that. Sorry. I know.
Roy Fife from the Office of Planning and Grants, representing the office.
Shane Vanetta with the Board of Building Code Appeals.
I'm Teresa Cox, and I think I'm here because I'm on the Parking Commission. But I have all sorts of other reasons.
I'm Cindy Cletty with the Office of Planning and Grants, also just a spectator tonight.
Linda Haig, Communications Officer for the city. Rob Porch, Board of Adjustment.
Jeff Ralston Clemmer, Board of Adjustment.
Jim Boggs. I'm a member of the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Board.
Rosalie Cates with the Redevelopment Authority Board, agency.
Ray Murray, Police Commission.
Kathy Schulte, Vice Chair of the Missoula Housing Authority.
Andy Sponseller, MUTD.
Brigitte Connor, MUTD, which is the Mountain Line Board.
Beverly Young, Board of Trustees, Public Library.
John Pierce, Greeno Park Advisory Committee, and I'm also a member of MJAC.
Kathleen Kennedy, also Greeno Park Advisory Committee and Open Space Advisory Committee.
Cynthia Manning, Historic Preservation Commission.
Suzette Dussault, Missoula County Public Schools Board of Trustees, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave early because we have a board meeting tonight.
Sherry Fraser, Missoula City Cemetery.
Dan Bucks with the Missoula City County Planning Board.
Don MacArthur with the Planning Board.
Mike McCracken with the Local Emergency Planning Committee.
And I'm Gary Sorensen with the Local Emergency Planning Committee.
Virginia Aaronsburg, I'm on the Parking Commission, and I'm an interested citizen.
Jennifer Anthony, Historic Preservation.
David Rechtman, Missoula Public Library.
Well, it's sort of an interesting group and a diverse group, and you're the only one, I think, who didn't say who you are. I'm going to hand you the mic, and then you can, don't you think that'd be a nice slide into your presentation?
Segue. Okay, I'm Mike Cadis, and I work for the city. We've just passed out this one. I'm going to start with a pie chart. Gary didn't get one. Are they back there? Let's start with the city budget, fiscal 2003, and that's our all funds budget. So this is everything. It amounts to about $100 million. It doesn't tell you a lot because there are a lot of projects in here, and those projects, you'll see the full cost of the project, even though the project may take 2 or 3 or 4 years to complete. That's why, the biggest piece of the pie is sewer plant projects. We've got a couple of them going on right now that we have one that's $15 million. We've spent, I don't know, maybe $1 million on it, and we won't finish spending money on it for another 3 years. But it gives you some context for the bigger picture, but the next page is what I think will give you a little better context. This really shows you that there's more that goes on than just the general fund. And the main things that go on besides the general fund are the wastewater treatment plant, building codes division, the MRA, which also has a big chunk of money, and the Missoula Parking Commission. So then let's go to the next sheet. General fund resources. This is our all funds budget is a little more than $100 million. General fund is about $30 million, and this is where the money comes for that $30 million. Over half of it is property taxes. Intergovernmental are we've got them mixed up. Well, the intergovernmental and state entitlement are money that comes largely from the state or the federal government. So our CDBG funds, things like that. State entitlement is a new category. That was all of our video gaming money, things like that, and alcohol tax, vehicle fees, a whole bunch of things were put into that. Licenses and permits, fines and fees. All of these fees have, as a share of the pie, have actually been shrinking. And so we're doing a study this year to look at that and see how we need to adjust those fees. Usually these are cost for service type of things. On taxes, they increase based on 2 mechanisms. One is that we're allowed to increase our property tax take by 50% of inflation from the previous year. So we can't keep up with inflation. We get to keep up with 50% of inflation. And the other thing is growth. So to the extent that new property value is created, or we grow and annex areas, then we get some additional growth with that. But you have to remember, when we do that, that means we have to provide additional services. So it kind of works on both ends. And because we've been growing pretty rapidly over the last 15 years, we have been able to, we've been better off than a lot of other cities around the state because of that growth, and we're able to get economies of scale. And we don't have to usually build a new fire station, or we may add a few patrol officers, but we don't have to build a new police station. But at some point or another, that catches up with you. We will have to build a new fire station. And like right now, we've done a study, and we see potentially 3 that we could build. And you know, it's actually relatively cheap to build a fire station. It costs you $1 million, $1.5 million to put it up, but it costs you $1 million a year to staff it, because you've got to have 3 people there 24/7. Next page, general fund expenses. So this is by department, and you can see, you know, police is 25% of the general fund, fire is 20% of the general fund, and public works at 17, and then parks at 9. Those are the 4 big things we do when it comes to money. And if you look at, like, administrative services is 8, and non-departmental over on the other side is 10. Well, those are both things that support those other 4 things by and large. So the slice for police is, you know, realistically bigger than 25%, because you have to have attorney services. Like in the attorney's office, we have 5 attorneys. Well, 3 of them are prosecutors. 1.5 to 2 are civil attorneys. So you get a sense. I mean, if we weren't doing police work, then we wouldn't need the prosecutors. And the same thing with the courts. There's a chunk in there that down on the bottom, 2% for courts. The other big thing that we do is, well, 2 other big things we do. Planning and grants. We spend a lot of time on planning. It's not a big money item, but there's a phenomenal amount of controversy that focuses around planning in a growing community. And this is zoning and subdivision review and all those things. And then the other part is health over there. And health is governed by a separate board. And a long time ago, there was an effort to separate health from the whims of political decision making. And so most health departments have a separate board, kind of like libraries, so that kind of one rabid group or another couldn't come in and say, no more books, or of this type or another. So there's an isolation that's been created. And you find that lots of places, and you find that here as well. And then the last page is the budget by functions. And just the key thing to see here is the 71% for wages and benefits. I mean, we're basically an institution that is driven by people. And we spend most of our money for people. Yeah?
What are the things you didn't mention?
That's like by and large. There are a few community organizations that are funded out of there. So money to the Art Museum, the Cultural Council, no, MRA is not in there at all. MRA isn't in the general fund at all. Okay?
So basically, administrative services and non-departmental could almost be added.
And split back up among all the other big ones. Yeah, that wouldn't be an unfair way of looking at things, just, you know, to get a kind of rough view of things. Okay, then the last thing I was going to show you is just this sheet, this table, and it's full of numbers and percentages. So I'll probably have to take my glasses off to read it. But this is kind of a change in the economy, and what we've tried to do is show this in, show national averages, and then in Missoula County, which is how we get these numbers. We have a difficult time getting them just for the city. But you can see kind of big gross changes between 1980 and 2000. And I guess I really, take this home and look at it and think about it. But there's one big change that really stands out and is kind of important to think about. And so if you look on this middle larger graph, gross income by sector, and look over at manufacturing. That was 21.1% of the total in 1980, and today it's 9.7%. Okay? So that's a huge drop. Now, what's interesting is that's the same kind of thing has gone on nationally. In fact, it's bigger. It was a bigger drop nationally. And what that is, for Missoula, that manufacturing is primarily wood products. But that's the closure of all those mills. Now, if keep on going down and look at services, it's gone from 14.9% to 29.4%. So that's a big change. That is also reflected nationally. And it's interesting what's happened there. We have this kind of notion about, well, services are bad and manufacturing is good. But be careful, because the kind of services that have increased so dramatically in our community and particularly in urban areas around the country, the biggest increase is in medical, and the second biggest is in business services, which covers a wide variety of things, including accounting, legal. Another big one is engineering services. These are all things that pay pretty well, and they all are reflective of the fact that an urban area is a center, and every place around that urban area uses those services. A lot of those services now are actually export services, software type of services, where you're creating something here, it actually gets piped out on a piece of fiber as opposed to on a boxcar, but money comes back in. So that's a big change. We complain about this change a lot. It is not unusual. The whole country has been doing exactly the same thing. In fact, even more so. The other one that I think is very interesting to look at is wholesale and retail trade. With the advent of all the big boxes out on reserve, we have this notion that Missoula is kind of the center of this giant sucking sound, and that kind of all of western Montana, from a retail perspective, has been forced into Missoula. And this indicates that that's really not the case. Our portion of retail and wholesale trade has actually been pretty stable over the 20-year period. It's changed the way it works, but it's as a portion of the whole economic sector, it hasn't changed very much. Traditionally, what the state does when they reassess the property is they lower the tax rate, so the dollars coming to communities is the same as it was. And then there's also another mechanism, is our property tax cap is a dollar cap. It's not a millage cap. So if it were a millage cap, and what you're talking, that appreciation in property and that reflection in the tax base came through, that appreciation would increase the dollars we were getting, still within the cap. But that's not how it works. It's a dollar cap, and so all that appreciation means is that we'll assess fewer mills. Schools could give you a lecture on that, too. There was one other question. Yeah, Suzette.
Actually, Mike, on the graph on expenditure types and functions, I was interested in your wage and benefits being 71%, because in the school district it's about 88%.
Right.
And so, and I'm just thinking, I'm wondering why, what's part of the operating expense, that there are no salaries and wages in line, is that
No.
maintenance, overhead?
A big bunch of it is capital. I mean, we do have to go out and buy new road graders and sanders, dump trucks, street sweepers. So that's a huge chunk of it. We also spend at least $200,000 a year buying new police cars, patrol cars. The average patrol car lasts 3 years, and it's got 100,000 miles on it. So.
well, ours would be probably building additional
Right.
building recommitment and would be coming out of another fund.
Right, you do that off of your general fund. Yeah. One last thing. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. I know that kind of taking 3 hours out of anybody's evening is a big contribution, and we appreciate your coming and helping us out with this. Hopefully you'll have some fun and enjoy the brownies while you're doing it.
Mike, you'll be here all evening. You're going to be kind of a drifter.
Yeah, I'll try not to influence any one group too much, and just if there are questions that come up, please just come get me and let me know, and I'll see if I can find an answer. Cindy.
Well, it's no surprise to anybody that Missoula City and County are undergoing a lot of change and growth in recent times. The mayor's office asked our office to pull together some statistics that would try to indicate what rate of growth we're experiencing and to put it in some kind of an historical perspective. So what you have in this particular packet is like a platter of hors d'oeuvres. It really should just pique your curiosity. It won't. Oh. Has it been passed out? I'm sorry. It would help to have it passed out. I won't spend 1,000 words. I promise I'll be brief. This has pictures in it. When you receive the packet, what you'll see is that the very first page attempts to put population growth in an historical perspective. We looked actually at the last 50 years in Missoula County to see what the rate of growth is or has been in the incorporated area of the county, meaning the city of Missoula, and the unincorporated area of the county, and also to take a look at it in context of western Montana and in Montana as a whole. And what you'll see is that Missoula County, compared to all of the other counties in the western part of the state, is one of the fastest growing. It's changed the greatest in percentage over the last 50 years or so, having increased in population by about 170%. It's surpassed only by Ravalli County, which has grown by about 175%. But the thing about Missoula County that you'll notice is that we've actually seen a fairly steady pace of growth over the last several decades. Actually, it averages out to somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3%. And so we haven't experienced the kind of spike in development or spike in growth that some other places have in western Montana. You'll also see on that chart that western Montana is becoming increasingly the place where the bulk of the population exists in all of Montana. And as a share of population, Missoula County is continuing to have the greatest share. Right now in Census 2000, Missoula County population was about 35% of the total regional population in western Montana. Western Montana was about 31% of total population in all of Montana. As far as looking at what the population consists of, the next several charts take a look at share of population by age cohort. These charts were developed actually back when school districts were thinking about what their future planning might need to be. We were concerned about school closure and so on. We wanted to see what the change in the population of youth has been over time. And so this charts Missoula County population from 1940 through the year 2000. The last chart, or the third chart, shows the percent of population by age and by decade. So you'll see that the adult cohort continues to grow as a share of population, while the school-aged child population has definitely decreased over the last few decades. Yes? We do have that information. We didn't present it here in this summary form, but we definitely do. And what we've seen is that over the last decade, the retired age cohort is actually increasing in size, but not as much as you might think, and not as much in Missoula County as in neighboring counties, particularly in Ravalli County. I think, no, I can't tell you exactly why, but what you'll see in one of these charts, and I don't know if we've gotten to it yet, is that that is a trend that has occurred in Montana also, and that, yes, towards the end of this packet we'll get to that, so that you'll see how Missoula County is faring compared to Montana and to the rest of the nation in terms of school enrollment, and how it has declined over the last several years, certainly in the last decade, but not as... Yes, thank you. And then we go into some selected population characteristics. In this particular chart, Dan, you'll see that we show what the total for 65 years and older is as a percent of the total population. This only looks at it from 1990 to 2000, doesn't provide quite the historical context, but you'll see there is a slight increase in that cohort, but not huge. That's the adult population. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, the parent age. Let's see here. How did you do this? Manage paper and a microphone, too. The next chart attempts to show what population changes have occurred by neighborhood area in the city of Missoula and in the urban area, and then in rural areas outside of the city of Missoula. This only looks at change from the 1990 census to the year 2000. But you'll see that certainly certain areas of our city are declining in population, while other areas of the city are experiencing some fairly significant increases in population. The city center, for example, has realized a 7% decrease in population, while the Y Mullen Road area has increased by 54%. Now you'll need to take a look at the raw numbers. In certain instances, a small amount of change, a numerical change, accounts for a large percentage, but we provided you those numbers here too, so you can get, you can take it into perspective. The next chart shows what from 1970 to the year 2000 the population growth has been in Missoula County and what consultants are telling us we might be able to expect into the year 2020. It's on this projection that we're basing things like the transportation plan, any urban comp planning that we do. The Missoula County Growth Policy used this projection. The next page begins to get into school enrollment, and there you'll see over the last decade for elementary, secondary school what the total enrollment in Missoula County for public schools has been and how it's changed. Then the chart following that is the one I was referring to earlier that indicates what the percent change in public school enrollment from 1991-92 school year to the 2000-2002 school year was in Missoula County compared to Montana and compared to the nation. Again, we can't explain exactly why, except to say that we're developing some theories that families with child-age or school-age children find it difficult here economically to support a family. Some of the economic data we have indicates what the earnings is, per capita earnings, and tries to relate that to age. And certainly the young family, adult age has not been faring as well as older populations in Missoula County. That's also true. That's also true. We've seen a definite increase in Missoula City and in Missoula County in non-family households and in single-family households. That change is fairly dramatic, so that we almost have half the population in Missoula right now living in non-family households. And then the next chart shows what sheriff, city, and total 911 responses have been from the early 1990s to 2001. Often we equate population growth with a growth in crime and are concerned about that. And I think what you'll see here is that actually the number of 911 calls has not increased at the same rate that population has increased in our area. The last chart is a summary chart of subdivision activity that has occurred in Missoula County and in the city of Missoula. It makes intuitive sense that there have been more subdivisions occur in Missoula County than in the city of Missoula. About a quarter of all subdivisions occur in the city, but only about a tenth the number of acres have been divided in the city as in the county. So more subdivisions of larger size occur in the county than in the city, which again makes fairly intuitive sense, or good sense intuitively. The average lot size of a subdivision in Missoula County is just over 2 acres, and the average lot size for a subdivision in the city is just under 1 acre, however. And when you think about it, in the city where urban infrastructure exists with sewer and transportation and other things, we begin to wonder if we're making really good use of land when we're only establishing lots that by average are just under 1 acre, when truly urban infrastructure can accommodate patterns that we see in existing neighborhoods of 4 or 6 or more lots per acre. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Clarifying question, Dan.
Is there any research work that's been done in that access to the soil, like oil, which has people choose to agree to developments in the county rather than trying to see something in the city? Obviously, there's less stuff available in the city, but that's number one. And number two, is there any work that's been done that shows the total cost for families that say live in Florence or Monroe versus people that live in Missoula, what the cost of living? I'm curious about this.
We haven't conducted a poll that would withstand any kind of scientific scrutiny. We do have plenty of anecdotal evidence and have done general opinion kinds of surveys. The stakeholders group did one several years ago. What we hear is that people tend to move into the more rural areas, semi-rural areas, because land is less expensive. Often housing is less expensive, and people have a sense that they would like to live in the country. However, the other point you bring up or question you ask has to do with how affordable people find it once they actually live there. And there have been some studies done, and I think Missoula Measures attempted to take a look at what the cost of living is for people who live quite some distance from where they need to go to work, where their children need to be educated, where they need to do their shopping, receive services, and so on. And oftentimes, people who are finding it difficult economically find that they need to come back to town, or they try to come back to town. And if not to town in Missoula, then closer to centers in Frenchtown or in Seeley Lake or in other parts of the county.
Any last clarifying questions? Suzette? I've often wondered over the last decade how much land has been dedicated to commercial development as opposed to residential, so land is being developed. It seems to me we've had a lot of commercial development, where land is used for commercial development.
We have looked at land that is used for commercial purposes, residential purposes, industrial purposes, and land that's open. I don't have those statistics here, but I could get them for you so that you could look at them during this process if you'd like.
Cindy, thanks very much. Well, that's sort of a quick look at some things that give you some actual data related to the operating environment. There are a couple other things I wanted, Mike, would you mind just saying something about your expectations related to what could happen with the legislature and the state deficit? Suzette, nice to see you. Thanks for coming. We'll send you the notes.
Well, as you can see from the pie graph that showed our resources, the biggest one is relatively fixed. It has some movement, but it won't keep up with inflation. Another big one, which is the what was it called? Thank you. The state entitlement, that will grow based on how the economy grows. So right now it'll increase at 3%, unless of course the legislature goes in and eliminates the inflation factor, in which case it wouldn't increase at all. So the budget problems at the state certainly have the potential to affect us. We're very concerned about that. They have the potential to affect us in two ways. One is directly through our budget. The other is indirectly. An example is, in the last special session, they increased the number of people they were going to let out of prison and onto parole. Well, that pushes people into Missoula who would normally otherwise be in Deer Lodge or in the Missoula County Correctional Facility. And that then pushes where our police force is. And we end up spending a lot more time with those folks rather than trying to deal with, say, quality of life issues that we've had a big debate over the last year. And so we're going to get squeezed that way. We'll get squeezed if the CHIPS program is eliminated, or it filters down. Urban areas tend to be places where people in difficult economic times come to because there are usually more resources there. And we will feel that as those resources are reduced at the state level. We're going to see we'll see more people locally with problems, and we'll see people from all of western Montana coming in to try to take advantage of what resources there are in Missoula, just because those resources don't exist. I mean, there isn't a Poverello in lots of other places around western Montana. So we expect to be impacted a number of ways by what happens in the legislature. Yeah. That's right. What it is it used to be about 5 or 6 different revenue streams that the state collected that were sent to us on some kind of formula. In the last session, all of those were consolidated. Okay, so they're all kind of come into one pool, and then we created an allocation system based on what everybody received with this inflation factor. So it was an attempt to simplify how the money was collected and redistributed back to local governments. Now, it did that, but it also created a target now that the legislature can go in and cut, whereas that target was much more difficult for the legislature to grasp before we pulled them all together in one place. Video gaming, vehicle licensing, beer tax, wine tax, there's 2 or 3 others. Well, they wouldn't cut those taxes because they're receiving the money now. They just go into the entitlement program and say what we're going to reimburse back. See, because what we get reimbursed isn't tied to those revenues anymore directly. So they could say, well, if we need money, we're going to share the pain. And yeah, exactly. So we're having our League of Cities and Towns annual meeting starting tomorrow. And this will be an important topic of discussion, and we'll be talking about our phone trees and email trees and how to influence the legislature. Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Well, that would be good. I mean, in this is a case where the legislature essentially made a promise to cities and counties, and so we want to help them keep their word.
Well, again, we wanted you to have sort of a snapshot of both kind of the internal and external operating environment of the city. And when I say the city, and for our purposes here, we're talking about your municipal government. You know, we're not talking about the vision that Mike and I might share about where we want to be in 20 years in retirement and all those kinds of things, and the reasons we live here, although those are very important. But what these folks have to do is have a framework within which to manage municipal services and the things that municipal government does for citizens. And so I'd like you to think about the kinds of things that were presented in terms of budget, sort of the allocation and the distribution of dollars. I want you to think about how much it costs the city to do business. I mean, the question about administrative and some other things. I want you to think about what Mike just talked about financially, the CHIPS program alone, that if the state does not fund the matching funds with the feds to get the CHIPS money, well, there's, what, a lot of kids in Montana, and probably, I'm thinking of the number, I can't pull it out of my hat, but then those become families that somehow in Missoula, through public and private infrastructure, we have to figure out how to take care of kids when it comes to health insurance or health care. So if you just think of the ramifications of what's happening at the federal level in terms of the deficit changing again, flip-flopping, and the other possible initiatives that this country might be involved in, and you think as well of what's happening in the state of Montana, and the fact that the state is suffering financially and economically, and a $250 to $300 million deficit is not small potatoes when we think about this state's budget. And then when we think about the comments about this is now an urban center, if you look at the rest of Montana, relatively, and why people come here, and how it might change, we want you to be involved thinking about all those things, the demographic kinds of things that Cindy talked about. We want you to think about what kinds of services do you want in a community if you have fewer school-age children and more people on the other end without families? What kind of demands do you have from the Parks Department recreationally? What are the kinds of demands that people have in terms of health care? What do people want to do in this community? How do they want their money to be spent in terms of the tax money that's collected and the dollars that come to you in some other way? So the city council and the staff in 2 different meetings identified several questions that they would like to ask citizens like you and have you respond to. And so what we did was box those up in sort of 6 packages. And for those of you that hate small group work, you'll hate this, but oh well, we're going to do it anyway. So I'm going to divide you into 6 groups, and I'm going to give each one of the groups a specific task. And here are the 6 tasks, just so you'll know that this is being worked on by somebody. What 5 things are we doing best as municipal government right now? And what are the 5 things, what 5 things are we doing worse? And then if you had $1 and you had to look at the services, the kinds of things we've talked about tonight, how would you allocate the 100 cents that are within that $1? And then we're going to ask that group to give us the criteria for how they made their decision, so that the city council and staff have some idea about the criteria that at least some smaller group of citizens would use if they were making decisions about how to allocate the money. $1, sort of, we're going to pretend that's the 100 million that Mike was talking about in terms of city government. And then we're going to have a group look at how do we, or do we, as a city, accommodate growth? And what changes that result from growth would not be acceptable? In other words, what are the sort of limits of acceptable change that you're willing to live with as citizens or not? And then what would you be willing to do to accept to contribute to this successful management of growth? And then the third group, in your opinion, are the current financial resources that the city has adequate? And we may take a cut coming up. If not, what would you propose to increase revenue? And in addition to the property tax structure that we have in this state, What alternative strategies do you think should be considered to pay for city services? Fourth group, what would the city do to better manage traffic or increase traffic in Missoula? And then as a citizen, what would you be willing to do to alleviate traffic congestion? It's probably the biggest topic of conversation most days. But look at the heads nodding. And then this is the only sort of affective or more esoteric question that we're asking, but everybody thought it was an important question to ask. What do you value most about living in Missoula, and what would you miss if you moved away? And we're not talking about your aunt or your, your tulips that come up every year, but what would you miss? What would you give up personally for improved community livability? And then in support of that, should city ordinances that are in place be sort of complaint-based, or should they be proactively enforced? And last, how's the city doing in citizen involvement in policy making? Could we do better? And from your perspective, what part of the population out there is not being heard, it's not involved, and what method do you prefer in voicing your opinion? So every group will have a different assignment. You won't know which one you get till I get your group, so you can't pick according to numbers. Andy? We don't know, but it would mean that, it would probably mean that you had people patrolling to see if dogs were on leashes, rather than somebody calling and saying, there's a darn dog in my neighborhood. I mean, you could put it on a continuum all the way from, you have a suggestion box for complaints all the way to the Gestapo for ordinances. So, and Gary, that's what you're hoping for. Okay. Here, give me your hand. Thank you. So, are you willing to take about a half hour and do this? So here's what I'd like to do. I could just count you off, and that's an easy thing to do. But I'd like you instead to sort of honor these criteria and see if you can group yourselves like this. I'd like, first criterion, 6 groups. Second criterion, they're relatively the same in size. Third criterion, they're diverse. So we don't want all the library board people together. We don't want all the emergency people together. We'd like you to sort of rub elbows and be able to talk to people who you don't sit on a board with. So I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to group yourselves in this room in 6 groups. Thank you. You'll have to figure that relatively the same size. So you're going to have to do a little hard work here. Do you have a spokesperson?
Hello?
We were Group A, and we were asked what 5 things are we doing best as a municipal government, worst? If you were given a list of city services in $1, what would the budget look like? And be prepared to explain the criteria you use to allocate your resources. So the 5 things that we decided were best about our government were the identification and acquisition of open space. This includes things like Mount Jumbo, the river trail system. There was some debate about some negative aspects of equitable. Some neighborhoods don't have parks and some do, so there was some debate about that. Another thing was making strides in promoting alternative transportation, for example, Bike Walk Bus Week, bike lanes, mountain line, and so on. We're not saying that these things are perfect. We had a lot of discussion about what's wrong with these things, but these are some of the things that we felt were the most positive and important. Good communications and lively conversations at city and neighborhood levels, a proactive approach to things. This includes things like neighborhood councils, recognition of the need for managing growth, including annexations. We feel that that's very important. Growth is going to happen, and again, we're not saying that a perfect job is being done by any means. You'll see it again in the negative aspects. But we feel it's important that the number one thing to recognize that that we need to do something. And a good quality staff. We feel in general that the police and the people at City Hall and in the planning department and the fire department are doing a good job and are hardworking, dedicated people. So those were the positive things. some of the worst things we found were the focus on accommodating cars rather than facilitating transportation, traffic, box stores requiring umpteen parking spaces in front of a store and not requiring bike lanes and so on, failure to foster diversity in managing growth in the community. The whole ordinance, the whole housing ordinance was an example of not city initiated, but sort of, I'm losing it here. Oh God, no, I lost it. Yeah, I'm thinking about the occupancy standard and the fact that, what's that? The fact that zoning often encourages non-mixed use. We have residential areas that cost a certain amount that preclude any people that are of lower income, and there's no apartment buildings there, and there's no stores there, and we think that by better planning and better zoning that we could encourage a more diverse mix. Planning that fails to achieve the stated goals of the community, that's kind of the same thing again. And insufficient enforcement of existing ordinances. A lot of, again, the housing ordinance, a lot of the problems that people were complaining about could be solved by existing ordinances if they were enforced. And we allocated the budget the way it is now because we ran out of time, and we and we felt like it really, we didn't have a lot of time to think about it, but it didn't seem like it was that far off and where it should be. So
your single criterion was we didn't have enough time.
Well,
that's how we made our decision. But we didn't have any big problems.
We didn't have any big problems with the way it was now, and so.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Jennifer. Are there additional things anybody would want to add to this? We could probably go on, excuse me, all night with the positives, and I don't mean to dwell on the negative, but are there any other things that we need to put up there in terms of what's not working so well right now? Would somebody like to add? Rosalie?
Everyone in the room is part of the governance structure, and I think we should make sure that we put in the things that are being done well with boards, and thank you. I think it's important for us to make sure that the city gets feedback on what is going well on boards and citizens that are appointed to kind of oversee strategy and what is you may think is not going well. So I just want to encourage everybody to make sure that that gets included in all our categories. So I'll put a positive one in. I think the city does a fabulous job of reaching out to fill the boards with really a lot of diversity, and it's a very open process, and they advertise it like mad, and I think that's a very positive part of the board structure.
We use that as part of our good communications. And yeah, we had commented on that was part of the good communications and lively conversations. One of the members of our group had noted that part of that is just what you talked about in terms of reaching out to staffing the boards and that sort of thing in an effective way.
Thank you, Dan. So what I put up here under this going well, that we really need to highlight the fact that there are so many citizens in the community that are involved on citizen boards and that kind of business. And what did you say the budget? That's true. So what do you, Rosalie, did you say to me that you thought that boards really had influence over a percentage of the budget? 10%, did you say? Yeah. So if you added up the amount of the budget where people really do, through boards and the citizen groups, have pretty strong influence over what happens to the money, it's probably a pretty good percentage, and that's very interesting. And what you said is that you have diverse candidates, lots of people want to be on them. You know, there are communities where if they can't get people on boards, and it's an open process, lots of people can get involved. It's not just the good old people that always get to do it. And then also, I'm going to mention this because you mentioned it to me earlier, and that is that often boards, one of the not working so well things, is that many boards don't see the strategic plan, and so they just sort of go their own path. They don't know where they fit within the context of the framework. And second, that boards aren't always collaborative with each other. Two boards are working on the same kind of issue, but they never talk to each other. So that's not a criticism, it's just some stuff that we could probably do better. Okay. Well, I think they did a nice job, don't you? Jennifer, thanks. Thanks to the whole group. Who was in that group? Stand up so we can see who was in it. All right. Thank you. Could we go to Group B? Bev, here's your mic. You tell us your task.
Okay. I apologize for writing in red. It may not be visible to those of you on the back row, but we were given brown and red. Okay.
My fault.
And I wanted diversity in color. How do we, as a city, accommodate growth? Well, our responses to this were based on how we currently accommodate growth and also how we can accommodate growth. We think that zoning flexibility will allow us to make the best use of spaces. We are seeking increased infill density to accommodate growth within the city boundaries. Flexibility in housing types, for example, modular units which can look different than what you might ordinarily think they look like. There are communities that have some different approaches to this and can be very nice neighborhoods. We need to continue vigorously planning for services. We do some of this already. Some of it we probably do well, some not so well. The sewer expansion is a real obvious one that's going on right now. Traffic planning, Malfunction Junction is another obvious place. Planning for parking, planning for parks, how we use the required mandated parkland in subdivisions. Right now we can't even, in some cases, we don't even have the money to mow the weeds on those parks. So perhaps a different way of looking at that and sort of packaging the land for parks. There are certain areas in town that are park dense and others that are park sparse. And streets. I mean, that goes along with the traffic. You know, what are we doing with our streets to accommodate flow of traffic and reduce congestion? Another really good idea is how do we accommodate growth? Growth means change. Change is hard for many people to accept. And we see it in all of our neighborhoods. We get into disagreements about how we should accommodate growth, how we should look at new sewers going in, et cetera, how we handle having more people closer to our homes. So having other methods to resolve these disputes other than calling the police or 911 and trying to have these services available for neighborhood disputes. So that's our response to the first question. Group, did I cover it all? Okay. The second part of our question was what changes resulting from growth would not be acceptable? The first thing that all of us said was traffic congestion, issues related to traffic. Pollution, air pollution, water pollution. Loss of our urban core. If we do not keep services in the urban area, then that will dictate changes in traffic so that we all have to go to the perimeter of the city to do our shopping and stuff. And there, as we all know, there are a number of people in Missoula who highly value alternative forms of transportation, and we need to make sure that services are provided in the urban center so it can be a lively, vibrant city center, and we need to keep services, commercial services in those areas. Increased crime is unacceptable. Increased urban sprawl and urban blight. An unacceptable change would be zoning and pricing of city services such that there would be a loss of income diversity in neighborhoods. And this is just an aside. I'm from Memphis, Tennessee originally. And I tell you, in the Deep South, you have neighborhoods where for square miles you see nothing but mansions. You know, and that's one thing I love about this. I live like 2 blocks from the wealthiest man in Montana. And, you know, I don't live in a high-income neighborhood myself. You know, it's that kind of income diversity, you know, that allows us to be a really blended community. So we would like to see things that promote income diversity in neighborhoods. The loss of sense of community. Missoula has a wonderful sense of community, and we don't want to lose that. And also we don't want to lose our natural beauty, which is the mountains, just the layout of the town, the way it looks, the great resources around us. Did I cover it? Okay. And the last part is, what personally are we willing to contribute to the successful management of growth? Well, we all already contribute our time through involvement in boards and committees. And I think we are committed to continue to do that. There are those that are willing to put their money into community services through charitable donations. Also increase funding through taxes and fees, marginal increase there, marginal being the effective word, right? We are willing to become more involved in the planning of this growth. Some of us are willing to look at where we live and say maybe we should live on less acreage, a smaller footprint. Some of us are intent on patronizing the businesses in the urban core so we can walk our talk and hopefully keep that urban core alive. And then also a feeling that we need to educate citizens and also our young people to the process of change, because change is not easy, but the earlier we get in and the earlier we educate people about the things which are coming, maybe the less dispute resolution we'll need to do in the long run. Okay.
Please, Andy, go ahead.
Did your group have any discussion about the carrying capacity of our valley, i.e. How much is enough in terms of available water, you know, the airshed? I mean, there seems to be a connection between, I constantly hear from people, you know, you can't do anything about growth. Growth is inevitable, but at the same time, you know, unacceptable changes. There's lots of things that it seems like people want, you know, have parameters for how much is enough, but don't really say how much is enough. And, you know, at some point, I'm just wondering if your group had some idea about how you say how much is enough of pollution or, you know, vehicle miles traveled on our city streets.
No, we didn't discuss that, but it's a great thought.
And of course, they had the same 40 minutes that everybody else had. So, you know, you can see that we could take each one of these blocks of questions and do a one-day workshop on them, just because they're, and I always think, wouldn't it be wonderful if you could have the whole community come together and talk to each other about these things? But folks like you, who already are serving on boards and commissions, are the people that come. And so I put Andy's comment up here, not that this group agreed on it necessarily, but just so it gets in the notes, that one of the questions is there a carrying capacity for the valley? And if there is, what is it? What should be the indicators? If that's the case, you know, we know there are some related to water, for example, just because of regulations and laws, but that's a real interesting concept about a carrying capacity locally. Please, Dan.
I guess just to comment, I think the pattern of the growth is more important than the quantity of growth, because you could have the same number of people spread out over broader areas, thus generating a lot of traffic miles, et cetera, and making and increasing the cost of services, for example. In other words, wasteful growth that wastes the resources, as opposed to the kind of growth that is more concentrated urban growth, where you can accommodate the numbers of people without the same impact on the resources. In other words, resource efficient rather than resource wasteful growth. As I think, as important, the pattern of growth is more important than just the total quantity of growth.
And that's sort of interesting when you think of carrying capacity again. You're talking about how do you measure it and how do you, what's the model? Well, it's an interesting thing. I'm going to take 2 comments on this, then I'm going to go on to the next group. David, you were first.
In terms of the concept of carrying capacity, I'm not sure what relevance it has, in the sense that it's not, as I understand it, currently anything with any sort of legal standing. As long as people want to come here, they're going to have the legal right to come here, and they will come here, regardless of what we might think the carrying capacity of the community is. And for that to change would probably require change on the federal level. So I'm not sure that the concept has any correlation with what we really can do or can really plan for.
We also live under the umbrella of some things in the state of Montana, and I can see 7 hearts beating outside their shirts in people in this room right now with their hands going up, and so so that we might get out of here by 9:30, I'm gonna take this last comment in this topic and then bring this one to closure. This group was provocative.
Well, just a quick comment in relation to traffic. One of the things that we're talking about in the Bike Ped Advisory Board at this point is not, I mean, the way the transportation plan is going now, they seem to be projecting anticipated, increases in traffic and building infrastructure around that. And we're saying, well, what if we, instead of that, set a goal saying we only wanted it, instead of like the projected 75% increase by 20, whatever it is, we only want 15%. What would it take? What would we have to do in order to achieve that? In terms of building, more bike lanes, providing more alternatives, all the other kind of planning things that have come up here. So it's just a different kind of take on planning. It's a more proactive, in a way, take, setting goals and then going backwards and saying, what can we do to reach those goals?
Thank you, Jim. So the other thing I put up here, and this is in response to this whole discussion from Dan and to David and Jim, what would be possible or legal? And is it even realistic? And then what would we have to do in sort of this reverse model where we set goals and then we planned for those rather than accommodating whatever came down the pipe? Okay. So with the people who were in this group, raise their hands. I thought they did a nice job. Thank you. So could we go to Group C now, please? Yeah, yes. And you're right. Didn't you go to my high school?
I think we may have a school in common. Our job was to, I don't have the questions in front of me, thank you. We were supposed to assess whether the current financial resources available to the city are adequate. We called in some financial experts to help us with that. And our assessment, based on our vast knowledge, is that resources are adequate but tenuous, probably. They're largely, Missoula has kept pace with its budget. It appears to be largely through population growth. Kind of a funky mix to count on. And then who knows what the state's going to do with their portion. So adequate, apparently, but tenuous. We feel, just from a gut level, that it seems like Missoula is pretty good at funding the status quo, but there's probably some constraints around real improvements that people are interested in. The second question is, if not, what would you do to increase revenue? These are all we just put this word, just consider. This is just a laundry list of possibilities. Annex wisely and judiciously, impact fees on developments themselves, like a per house fee on new developed houses. This isn't really a revenue source, but encourage density to make the city's expenditures more efficient. Developing taxable and tax-paying business and industry. Pretty important to keep up with state policy so that the state gives cities their share of the revenue pie when they're dividing it up at the state. Kind of a question on this is all kind of stuff you could make people pay for when they get it. Ambulance, 911 calls, disturbing the peace calls, libraries, nuisance police calls, which we thought might actually be a tool in the what are we calling it, the occupancy thing. Another tool, there's starting to be some Friends of foundations, for instance, with the library, and I think the parks are talking about it now, so Friends of foundations, and the opportunity to sell land parcels if there's some that need to be sold. None of these have like this imprimatur from us that these are great, they're just ideas that we throw out. The interesting thing that was said was it would be pretty important to know where we're falling short. In other words, just to consider general need for revenue is a little bit hard. We're sort of curious what the constraints are, what aren't we able to fund. And obviously it's important to attempt to match new revenues with these uses and consider the sources. And our final conversation was we should aggressively seek federal grant funding, which helps you do innovative things. Was that somewhere in there I missed a question, but that's everything we answered. Those are all the answers.
Okay. What's that thing that was being done? Thanks. So, when Rosalie's group, first of all, who was in this group? All right. Interesting, sort of a diverse group. And on this business of adequate but hard to go beyond the status quo, does that, Mike, does that sort of fit? Oh, he was the expert you brought in. I see. Oh, well. Yeah.
One of the dilemmas that we face, I know one of the other questions was get away. One of the dilemmas we face is one of the other issues is that we enforce a lot of our ordinances on a complaint basis. Well, and we don't go out and aggressively enforce. Well, it costs a ton of money to go out and enforce actively, and we don't have the resources to make that jump at this point in time.
So then when people look for other ways of doing things, maybe sometimes the best tools aren't available. For example, through an ordinance that gets aggressively served. And I'm thinking the occupancy thing again, Rosalie. So Dan, you were just waving?
I think the judgments about the resources being adequate reflects the experience of the last 10 years and is not what the experience will be in the next 10 years. State and local finances are nationally about to drop off a cliff or are dropping off cliffs, and it may, because of the property tax, it may not happen as fast in the city, but there are serious clouds on the horizon, and the 90s were an era of growth. including annexation, that the same growth is not necessarily in property values, is not necessarily on the horizon, and the general fiscal climate is very negative for state and local governments. And so I think 2-3 years from now, the judgment might be different from what's being made here tonight.
Thank you. On this second page, where you said you need to know where we're falling short, and that's one of the places you said if citizenry wanted ordinances actively, assertively enforced, that'd be a place that'd be hard to fund. Are there any other things that are hard to fund, that are harder than?
Two incredibly big areas that we struggle with immensely right now are wages, and we did 3.5% across the board last year, but our firefighter contract went to arbitration, and the arbitrator said, you know, you're way behind, you need to catch up, and so there are 10 and 15% increases in there. The other one, and that may be the case in some other departments as we go along here. Another one is our health care benefits. We have a really good health care plan, no question about it. But when you have 15% a year inflation, you just can't maintain, you can't keep up with that on the revenue side. And so we are going to end up in a lot of difficulties with our bargaining units over what kind of health care plan, and all of our employees. So.
Okay, thank you. And then when we can't compete with wages and benefit packages, then we may not have the kind of staff that we really have had. And you start not being competitive for quality people, and that's hard, or keeping people.
Should stop this. But one of the things we do, when we hire at particularly our medium and higher levels, we really are ineffective when it comes to hiring out of state. We can't offer the dollar package that will catch anybody's attention. And so what we do is we hire people who know about Missoula, who have built up skills and expertise and want to come back, or what we really focus on is try to bring people through our organization and grow the skills. But we don't, that option of kind of bringing in someone from someplace else is largely limited just because we're 20 or 30% below what the opening, they'd have to take a pay cut like that to come and work for us.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much to this group. I think they did a nice job. Jennifer, please.
One question I had about the enforcement was that if you were more proactive in enforcement, wouldn't tickets that you wrote and stuff sort of help pay for that cost?
Yes, to the extent that there are tickets, though, I think we would be hard-pressed to show that ticket revenue actually covers the cost of enforcement. Enforcement is largely subsidized by general property tax dollars.
And I think there's a group that's going to talk a little bit about that when they get to their part too. So could we have the Ds? Cynthia.
What we did is basically just brainstorm through the first question, which was, what would the city be? What should the city do to better manage increased traffic in Missoula? And so as I said, these aren't ranked or ordered or anything like that. It was basically just some brainstorming. One of the ideas was that we should have the Bitterroot rail service, it goes from the Bitterroot and comes in, dumps off here at the Safeway or parts we're in. And maybe to improve the park and ride system, and we're aware that that has improved recently, but there could still be some more times offered for that. One of the, well, you might have to comment about that, the Highway 93 bypass, to have it come off from the hill at Evero and have it go around town, so there'd be a 93 bypass, like the business loop. We're really getting pretty cosmopolitan here. But that would just be an alternative. Might take another bridge, but an idea to explore. Any comments on that? Did you want to comment further on that?
No, we're just looking at ways to
So he was saying, all right, just as the idea to have a bypass through that for some of the traffic, not necessarily the tourists. Okay. Another one was to have, we wondered if there was a traffic master plan, and that we probably, if there might be some, but maybe we need a better one, to talk both about maintenance and new construction. Another idea was better communication and coordination of street closings. I mean, if they're going to be doing street construction, if you could let people know if they're digging up something to do some work at a crossing, and then somebody comes in later, the railroad comes in. And another specific thing we talked about were railroad crossings, particularly one of them was the Rattlesnake, when they have the Madison Street Bridge here. And that really brings up a question about the egress issue from the Rattlesnake, particularly like with respect to fires, Grant Creek and the Linda Vista areas, that's a pretty dangerous situation, only having that one way. Another one was traffic intersection signaling. Like, could we all just write a letter and say, could we please have a traffic signal light at this intersection? There's some real obvious places where we need to have some better flow of traffic. We also said, we had a little discussion about bike lanes, and make sure that they're clearly marked, and to provide connectivity to something as you're driving along. I mean, you're trying to be cognizant as a driver, and all of a sudden the bike lane disappears. And I always go, well, where's the biker supposed to go? And am I going to hit somebody, or somebody going to come up behind me? So that's, engineering by paint and trying to deal with that. We just need to maybe look at that a little bit more closely, because especially when it snows and people might not be aware if they're coming into town and they don't take the bypass and they don't know that that's a bike lane or something, are they going to hit somebody? So that's why we just put the word reevaluate, look into those things. And then our second question was ways that we could look at evaluating congestion, which of course our last one was maybe our first one, to encourage our friends and neighbors to walk and bike more often when possible. And of course we had to put the obligatory carpool more often. But basically what we thought, if we could look at any of these issues here, that we would be able to, they inherently would help to alleviate some of the congestion. Okay, this one was, most ideas, as I said, to ease traffic would directly impact how individuals would alleviate congestion, and it opens up some more options. This was one, forgo some intersection site visibility when you have the 30-foot plus yellow curbs, that perhaps it could help just with the flow of traffic and parking and downtown stuff to have more curbside parking. And again, that we all chip in and work on this. Any questions?
Thank you, Cynthia. And who were the people in this group? There were only 3 people in this group. And when I asked them, I said, geez, you guys are really cooking. And they said, well, we only have 3 people. But they also said, we're all really talented. So, no, you, but someone else spoke for you. So, this was an interesting question, and both the council and the staff brought it up. And it had to do with, we want to hear somebody talk about traffic. And so you did. We asked you, what would you be willing to do personally? And then what were the kinds of things that you would suggest? And the thing I like about these is that they're fairly operational. I mean, I don't mean they're easy to do. I just mean they're not sort of some guiding principles. They're specific things that could happen if you had the money and those kinds of things. So thanks very much to that group. Nice job. So can we have the E's? It was that group back there, by the hook with the balloons. Are you the spokesperson? Let me move these markers out of the way so you don't trip on.
You won't be able to read this any better if it was closer, so. We kind of sighed a little bit of relief when we got our questions, because we thought it was the easiest. But it didn't turn out to be that way. And really we found that ours was more personal, at least in the first value question, what do you value most about Missoula? And so I sat there and tried to think of ways that I valued the city of Missoula. But our thoughts really more went to we value surrounding Missoula. We value the mountains, the walking trails, the rivers that run through, especially our climate here. And I expressed to the folks in the group, I'm not as old as some and younger than some, but have lived here my whole life and my family for 2 or 3 generations. And I've lived in Alaska and Colorado and a few places. I've left here. And the things that I miss always in those places are the 4 distinct seasons that we have here in Missoula. You miss that when you go someplace else where it's desert and hot or rainy and cold. We have good climates, we have good seasons. One thing I did find out, having left here a time or two and come back, is around Christmas time here, which goes along with growth, we end up with a little bit of smog where you can't hardly see to get to the mall. And that's all part of, unless we have some big fans, there's nothing we can do about that. We also felt that Missoula has a small town feel with most of the amenities of a big city. I mean, there were times when you had to go to Spokane or someplace else to experience some things, retail, trade, or entertainment, etc. We have some pretty nice things in Missoula now, and we still have that small town feel. Also, if you've lived here long or lived here short, the historical significance in our Missoula area is very interesting, and it's nice to review. And some mentioned when you go in the mall and you walk down that one corridor and you've got all the pictures of the founding fathers, and actually, truly, those are the guys who screwed up the streets. We appreciate, those of you who didn't go to Montana State, appreciate the university flavor of Missoula. And actually, if you took the university out, with the living, the ordinances, the problems with the shared living, et cetera, if you took the university out, Missoula would be a totally different town. We mentioned that Missoula is a people town. If you've gone any place in the world and come back to Missoula, Missoula is a very friendly place to live. We are constantly amazed at the community-minded spirit of the people of Missoula and the energy. If there's something that comes up that needs attended to, Missoula is very generous. Going with our scenery and area, proximity to recreation, urban and rural, the combination of those resources. And Missoula is a very diverse town and a tolerant town. We mentioned that you can go to other places out of Missoula and you can find bigotry and hatred and attitude, and it just isn't prevalent here in Missoula. That's something we really appreciate. And something I mentioned that when I lived in Alaska, which is kind of odd because I never thought about it, but when I came back to Montana, I was traveling, just visiting with my folks, noticing older couples and people in the community, in restaurants, etc. They weren't in Alaska, and that's a valuable commodity in Missoula. What do we give up to improve community livability? And we didn't add the word moderate here, and it was, and that was the first thing that came to my mind. But in our community, we have difficulty simply because we don't have enough individuals. There's not enough people to tax. There's not enough businesses to tax. So we do quite well here. We have issues around here right now in all the communities outlying. Schools need to be, education needs to be uplifted, and new facilities, and people can't pay the taxes, and the levies get voted down. The same thing happens in Missoula. We could come up with many ways to solve all these problems, and it always comes down to tax, which is difficult. What could we do? Many people, for instance, all of you sitting here, time and personal involvement in boards and cities, trying to help figure out ways. Something that I mentioned growing up in a rural area, back in those days, someone moved into the community, you didn't know them, you baked a pie, you took it over. I would venture to say most people here probably don't know all of your neighbors, and your neighbors may have come and gone many times and didn't get to know them. They didn't get to know you. And there was a time when community groups solved those ordinance problems, and I think that we need to get closer in our community areas and deal with those covenanted or ordinance type situations without having to deal with the police department or the fire department or the dog catcher or someone. I think we can deal with that on a community level, we think. We discussed some of the inconveniences. We've got the inconveniences of 39th Street right now that would impact a lot of people. But we're willing to put up with some of those temporary inconveniences. If you knew Missoula from the time when I was a kid to what it is now, there's been a lot of change. But I think the people who have lived here the longest accept that change better than those who move in here. And I certainly wouldn't want to go back to the days of coming around the corner by the golf course and by the doghouse bar and no reserve street. You know, things are certainly better. And again, going back to community group involvement to deal with some of these issues rather than taxation. Ordinance complaint-driven or proactive, that was difficult. We had an individual I wanted to help present part of this because he was quite, he felt that, was that on my other sheet? One of the things that he would like to give up was less city services. So we tried to define that, and it really came down to basically police. And I mentioned, but well, maybe if something happened to your house was broken into, or someone had an accident at your house, you probably wouldn't count how many vehicles were out there. Maybe a neighbor would, whether it was whether they overreacted or not. So then we maybe discussed reallocation of services and how that will work. But it really, when we come to the next page, it goes back to we would support complaint-driven city services with more proactive community involvement, which would be neighborhood councils to deal with covenant enforcement, ordinances, neighborhood watch, etc. I think we have some good programs starting in Missoula. And one of the interesting things that I see, I've seen a few of the bumper stickers, but pace cars in the city, I think those things happen. Those are community-minded things that don't really cost. I understand they ordered another 100 bumper stickers, so that's not a big issue, but it slows down traffic and makes people think in a community-minded way. You know, we sit in a city the size of Missoula, it's kind of like going into a very large, unfamiliar church. You feel like a little person in a great big pool. But if you work in your community and not worry about all of Missoula, it all starts to turn together. I think I answered them.
Thank you, Rob. So what kinds of things went through your head when you were listening to this? What was the name of that bar? The Doghouse. We were when I was in college, I remembered where that was, and I thought I'd lost all those memories. So, so this is kind of interesting to think about. You know, the other stuff really goes to the municipal services, and I thought it was very interesting that this group, when they started talking about what it was they valued, it was hard not to go to the amenities and the affective, the feel, the sense of geography or place for individuals. That's pretty interesting. So would you be willing to pay more taxes? That's what this group said. They said, we'd be willing to give up a little money. Some people would. Teresa.
The other part of money wasn't just giving up taxes, but how many of us gave up the opportunity to earn more money someplace else to live here? So it's not just how much money we're willing to pay, how much money we're willing to contribute to things, but how much money we're not making because we live here, and the quality of life is so much more important to us than that extra money would be.
Wow, okay. So could we see who was in that group? All right, thanks very much. Last group was F.
Okay, well, I'll just start by reading the questions on the list. It says, how is the city doing in city involvement in policymaking? And all the folks on our committee agreed that overall the city's doing a pretty darn good job of reaching out to people and finding out what they think. And my personal opinion is the city kind of bends over backwards to find out what people think. And we all agreed that in those terms, that's what the city was doing. How could we do better? Well, we didn't say that we could do better in a particular way, but we worded it that we could always work to improve things by better communication. In other words, citizen involvement's a lot about information, and we thought that communication, it was a two-way process, and that really aids citizen participation. I think the city does a really good job. I think, when did we get the information officer? I think it was 1997. Linda came on? 1995. Really, I think that was a huge step in the right direction, and that's kind of what we meant by better communication, letting people know what's going on so that they can process that information, and that's part of participating is processing information out there. We talked about some of the things that keep people from participating, and there's some folks that probably wouldn't participate no matter what. We talked about apathy, and that you can only do so much for people that are apathetic, and they're just not going to participate. But some folks have economic barriers to participation, folks that are working 2 or 3 jobs, and there's lots of folks like that in Missoula. So whatever we could do to reach out to people that are time constrained, and I think providing lots of information through different channels is one way that we can help people that can't come to public meetings and so forth. So that's one way that we could work to improve participation. Let's see, from your perspective, who is not being involved or heard? One of the groups that we talked about, and Mr. Ralston Clevenger mentioned the folks that go to the university. They come here every year, and they're a big part of our community. Although the face has changed, they're a significant portion of the community. And we talked about how perhaps we could have a little bit better communication with the people that form the university community. And we already have links to groups like AUSM. They're a big part of our board at Mountain Lion. Their transportation officer is a part of our board, and that's a good link for us. But maintaining links with special constituencies in town, like the college students, is a way that we can get information from people and help them to participate. One of the things that we all agreed on real strongly was that participation is, as I said before, is enhanced by information. And we thought that whatever we could do, and we know that the information office in the city already works to do this, but we thought that encouraging the local media to cover civic issues more in depth, public meetings, say what went on, so-and-so said this, so-and-so said that, and in more detail discuss what goes on with civic issues in news stories would be a good thing so that people can process that information. It's pretty hard to go over and tell a corporate news organization what they're going to cover, but whatever we could do to encourage them to cover civic matters would be a good thing. And then the last part of this question was, what method do you prefer in voicing your opinion? And we all thought that the old classic open door policy was a really good thing, like being able to access the mayor, city council people, your county commissioners, all that sort of thing. In other words, knowing that you can call up and say, hey, I'd like to come in and talk about this issue, and knowing that you're not going to get brushed off and that you have that access. And then in this age, electronic communication is something that's really become a reality, and we all thought that that was a really acceptable form of voicing opinions via email, and specifically we talked about email. And that the old tried and true public meeting is still a valid way that we thought people can participate, although, there are some problems, like the people that can't make public meetings, so we have to figure out how we can mitigate that. So, any questions? You bet.
Well, it's interesting they'd say public meeting at the end, since that's what this is. Who all was in this group? Thank you. Nice job. The reason this question is so important is because this is the link between what the city does and the citizens. And if that kind of avenue is not in place, then people are crabby and people are cynical and all those kinds of things. So I appreciate the work that you did here, and particularly the identification of populations that we may not be connecting with. We might include elderly and some others. Your comment about time and convenience and the barriers are probably the most important thing to think about. So we did sort of a different approach tonight. Instead of having people sit down and say, what do you want? What should the goals be? What's the list of gripes you have? We thought that by having discussion around those 6 questions or blocks of questions, that maybe the conversation would be more interesting and more in depth in terms of the kinds of things that the city needs to hear from citizens. So I, for one, as the facilitator, really appreciate you being willing to spend the time. Would you be willing to tell your friends and neighbors to come to the other 2 of the meetings? Will be the same, or do you think it would be useful to have, so you'd sort of go out and be the cheerleaders and try to get, honestly, there are more people here than I thought, but not as many as we hoped for. And so it'd be really useful. Mike? Yes, yes, yeah. We wanted to have consistency in what we asked of the groups. And while there were people invited to the 3 individual meetings, everybody can come to any of them. I mean, any of you could come back if you had such a good time tonight, you wanted to spend another 3 hours, or you needed a brownie. So they will be the same. But, our hope is that we have at least 100 citizens involved throughout the process, and maybe more if possible. So this will be typed up. We'll send it out to all of you. We'll also try to send out the copies of the public meetings to all the people who attend all the public meetings, so you at least know what citizens are saying. And then sometime in January is when they'll come back to you and say, okay, we took your stuff and we developed around the 3 goal categories, which are, Linda, can you say the 3 goal categories?
We're going to hand those out. Right. Our 3 goal areas are internal organizational management, which is the structure that enables us to perform the services that our citizens need. And it aims at efficiency and effectiveness, as a core value. And then the second one is community livability, which is sort of the nuts and bolts of daily life in Missoula for all, ranging from health to safety to all the infrastructure, subdivisions, et cetera, all the daily work that we do. And then the third goal is community involvement, and it's compared to the other 2, it has less content in it, generally speaking, year to year, but it is what helps us find ways to intentionally involve citizens in city policies and processes. So those are the 3 that we've worked with for the past 4 years, and we're looking for affirmation from the community as to whether these are still the 3 areas that we should concentrate on. And
so unless we hear real loud feedback to the contrary, the city probably will stay with those 3 goal categories. And we tried to build the questions around those. What do we need to do so that the city, through municipal services, is as livable as possible? and it remains the place we want it to be. Second, how can we be most efficient and retain the kind of staff we need and most efficient with dollars and resources internally to get the job done? And then third, what's the bridge or connection between citizens and their government? And so unless we hear, as I said, real loud comments to the contrary, those three categories will stay the same, although the goals and objectives and action plans from departments will change as they move into the new 3-year period. So I'm going to hand this over to Linda, and she's going to talk a little bit about another sheet that you have to take home, and also kind of where the process goes from here. We're going to try to get you out of here in about 2 minutes. I'm sorry, Sherry. I really appreciate, again, having you come, and I know you've already had a long day, so it makes me proud as a citizen that you would come and do that. Thanks very much.
Okay, just a couple of business kinds of things. Is there anyone here who did not sign in tonight on getting here? If you would please do that, because we're going to either mail you or email you the session notes, and if I don't know that you were here, I won't be mailing them to you. And all of you who provided us an email address, does that mean that yes, you are comfortable with us sending you the session notes as a Word document attached? Okay. If there's anyone who would prefer to receive it, through hard copy, we'll provide that. Okay. And then someone mentioned the PACE car program. I do have some brochures here that the neighborhood office gave me. If you're interested in signing up to be involved in that, there's a few brochures here, and that's just for your information. The other handout that you have that we didn't talk about, we just sort of forgot to talk about it at the time we handed out, is the one that's called a sampling of strategic plan accomplishments. Did you all get that? We did pass it around. Yeah, if you didn't, Jenny, couldn't you grab the few that are left over there? And this is just something that we generated internally, and it's sort of top of your head reactions from some city council members and some departments, and we just wanted to list what we felt were accomplishments that we were proud of over the past 2 to 3 years that are represented in the existing strategic plan. And I think it might give you an overview of the kinds of things that we have actually accomplished, because those of you involved in city government know that sometimes we all feel like we're sort of spinning our wheels and get bogged down in the process. But there are some really significant things that we've accomplished here, and so we'd like you to have that just for reference, or as you look at ideas that you have for other plans. Oh, the other thing I wanted just to mention as a point of information, someone mentioned interacting more with the university area residents, the students. I've had a really productive experience with Judy Spanagel at the University Renter Center, and I've just sent the new Guide to Codes booklet to print, and it'll be back in a couple weeks, and it is the overview booklet that explains municipal codes and how to live peacefully if you follow the rules. And I know a lot of you have seen that in the past few years. Well, I offered the content of that booklet to the university free of charge so that they could produce it for their students, and they can produce it more inexpensively than we can. And so they will be producing, I believe, about 6,000 copies of that also for distribution on campus. So, that's the kind of thing we like to do when we can. So that's all I have.
Okay. Now, without the... I'm sorry, thank you, guys. Thank you. Take care.